Welcome to this meeting of the Wingecarribee Local Planning Panel on the 25th of October 2023. I declare the meeting open at 2 p.m. My name is Julie Walsh and I'm the chair of today's panel. Also sitting on the panel today are expert members Linda Kelly and Scott Barwick and community member Robert Stass. Acknowledgement of country. Wingecarribee Shire Council acknowledges the Gundungurra and Tharawal people as the traditional custodians of this land we now call the Wingecarribee Shire. I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders here today. Apologies. There are no apologies and there are no declarations of interest. The procedure for the meeting, which will be quite short today as there's only one item and one speaker. We'll hear from that speaker and there may be questions. We normally provide 3 minutes, but I'll provide 5 today, seeing there's only one speaker and one item. Once we've heard from that speaker, we'll go into closed session to deliberate and we'll return to the meeting to give our decisions with reasons. Could I ask everyone to please place their mobile phones on silent, and I advise everyone that the meeting is being live streamed. So the one and only item for which we have a speaker is item 6.1, Development Application 23/1006, Development Application for a single-storey dwelling house at 588A Mossvale Road, Burradoo, and Scott Lee, on behalf of the applicant, has registered to speak. Thank you. And I should say we have received your email with the attached sketch. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. May not take the full 5 minutes, but maybe there's some questions which might expand a few issues. I'm attending this afternoon with me is Laurel Lawson, who is the owner of the property. And if required, Laurel might be able to help me with some particular questions, but otherwise I'll do that. We believe that the matter can most simply be summarised as whether or not our proposition for the orientation of the dwelling results in a lesser or greater impact to the view corridors that Council is trying to protect. The application that was lodged fully acknowledged the history of the subdivision that created the lots, and Council, I think, rightfully identified and imposed some conditions around the final outcome for residential development of the sensitive issues that came out in the assessment of the subdivision. What we say is that the application has respected the location of the building envelope. We haven't moved it to some distant point on the site. The house will be built exactly where the Council had envisaged it, which is the envelope. The difference being the orientation of the envelope that we say has actually a lesser impact on the identified view corridor rather than a greater impact. I'm not too sure, you mentioned that you had the submission that we made. We did submit similar analysis with the development application to that effect. We had that revisited by Paul Bangay Landscape Architects, who have done the landscape design for the site, and that might be a question you have later on. But we asked them to redo that, and I think, Lisa, if you have that, I think you said you might have it, you could just whack it up on the screen there so we can see it. But what that demonstrates is that the orientation we propose has a slightly lesser impact in terms of the square metres of the house that intrudes into the view corridor than if we built the house on the orientation that the Council has for the prescribed envelope for Lot 4. We don't think, therefore, that the proposition is an unfair one or an unreasonable one, or one that ignores the reasons behind Council's restrictions on the property. In fact, it can improve the situation. It'll be a single level dwelling house compatible with the other 6 dwelling houses that are going to be built there. I believe one's already approved. There's another application in the system. Other applications will come forward. And in due course, all of those applications will have regard to the restrictions on the property and there will be a scattering of 7 dwellings across that across the 7 lots. So there's nothing surprising with our proposition or the development application other than we wish to reorientate the building. We stayed within the envelope. The envelope, I think the report, if I've got this right, quotes a building footprint of 570 odd or 590 square metres. I forget the exact figure there. I haven't got it there. 574, I think, 574.98 square metres within the 600 square metre envelope. Now, the 600 square metre envelope is not an excessive size to start with. It's quite restrictive for a large rural property and a large rural property in a prime location. So the applicant has not sought to double the size of the envelope, double the size of the house, intrude into areas that development would not have been anticipated. And we think that the evidence that we've put forward, or the analysis that we put forward, supports our contention. I didn't see, and council staff may have explained this to you, I'm not sure, but I didn't see in the assessment report any direct contradiction to that. The argument was that it was not in the envelope and would have some impact on the view corridor. But that's the case to a greater degree if we orientate it the way council has prescribed the envelope. On the logic, we say that the development should be approved because on all other matters it's a very reasonable dwelling house. Like I say, happy to take some questions. There was some concern raised around the landscaping. The landscaping plan for the site's been designed by an eminent landscape architect, but if that is of some concern to council in terms of the choice of planting or the arrangement of that, the applicant is more than happy to revisit that and provide a landscaping plan to council, to some council instruction, or take out elements that are of concern. The task this afternoon from our perspective is to try and convince the panel that the development application for the dwelling and its orientation is worthy of support. So happy to take some questions.
Thank you. Do you have a copy of the report there?
I do not have a copy of the report. Online, so, I don't print them out any longer.
Yeah, on page 37. Can I just...
Oh.
So do you agree with that diagram?
As far as I understand the diagram, I don't disagree with the diagram. It's a representation of the dwelling, and I think underneath there, figure 10 shows the sight line and the easement. Well, that should be a matter of fact, so I wouldn't argue that that's correct. It says the green is the acceptable development area of the approved building envelope. Now, I didn't say anything about that in my opening remarks, but the one thing I would say is that it's, at the very least, odd that the council has placed the building envelope in the view corridor. And then to turn around and say, well, that's just bad luck, you can't build in that part of the envelope, would strike me as unreasonable. But I don't dispute that that's what the diagram just shows. It says the portion of the approved building envelope that encroaches into the sightline easement is the orange. Again, I wouldn't dispute that. It's not dissimilar to what we have shown. The portion of the proposed dwelling which is located outside of the acceptable development area in red. That's based, I imagine, on the orientation of the dwelling, of the envelope as council has it, as distinct from what we have it. So, yeah, aware of that, and that's, I suppose, that's in my mind, we've presented something, and this is the counter figure to analyse the potential impact.
So is just having a look at the triangle of orange there,
Mm-hmm.
Is your argument that the easement or the restriction there in respect to that sightline only applies in relation to vegetation, not building?
My understanding is the envelope is a building envelope, nothing to do with the vegetation or potential site landscaping. It's a building envelope. And I think certainly my client, myself, and any other of the landowners there are all contemplating building within the building envelope, and then potentially landscaping and other could be outside of that. And And that's the way we have approached it.
But the building envelope's a maximum, not a minimum.
The building
Do you agree with
envelope, look, I don't argue with that either. I mean, that's I think, certainly from my point of view, that's a common understanding that you just prescribe an envelope, and within that, you do what you seek to do. What the point I've just made, and I'll make it again, is that 600 square metres is not a very large envelope. And in this circumstance, that's understandable as to why council may have sought to reduce the size of the envelope. But there is nothing to say in any other planning legislation or council's controls that says you can't seek to maximise it. And I dare say everybody in these 7 lots will be seeking to maximise it because it's not very large. 600 square metres is not a big building envelope for a prime rural location within Wingecarribee Shire Council. It's simply not. Then, if the council then wants to take the view that we put the envelope partly in the view corridor and that means you then can't use part of your 600, I would be objecting to that, or at least as far as I can, saying that that's completely unreasonable. I just go back to my proposition, which is if you orientate the envelope the way we have proposed and you look at the building that we have proposed, the impact on the view corridor is less, not more. And that's the logic we've brought to the application, and that's the logic we are seeking support for from the panel.
And have you considered shifting the building further away from the road? I mean, it would still
From
reach
the
the
road.
building envelope, but shifting it further away from the road, keeping this orientation, which would mean that you would then be clear of the
Well, we
corridor?
haven't formally sought to do that. I mean, there are other restrictions with the flooding and then the effluent disposal. So the sites along there had challenges. That's why I think the DA for the subdivision took a long time, but they got there in the end. But it has these restrictions. My understanding is that it could be possible to shuffle down the downslope a little bit, but not a great deal, because then you start to run into those other issues of the flood line and the effluent disposal distances from watercourses and what have you. Based on the diagrams, both our diagram and the council's diagram, it wouldn't take much moving forward to get out of the view corridor completely. And if that's seen as the priority, well, that would be a great result. I don't think it means a significant amount in terms of earthworks and cut and fill. I mean, it's not a steep property, but it has a fall. So there'll probably be a little bit of maybe additional work, but then you might pick it up at the other end. I don't think it makes a lot of difference, but it could make the difference between being in and outside of the view corridor, but you are going to be constrained by the other 2 issues of effluent and flooding.
Oh, actually, just before, I just wanted to let you know, I forgot to get those papers back.
Sorry? Yep.
We've been advised that both Lot 1 and Lot 3 have had approved dwellings that either fully complied with the building envelope in the case of one of them and substantially complied in the case of the other one. So I just thought, that's
Yes,
Lot 1 and Lot 3.
I was aware of that. I was aware of, I think, Lot 1, perhaps not the Lot 3 being approved as yet. I'm aware that Lot 7, I think, is in the system, but has yet to be determined. And I would say if that, no, I think that's good. I mean, the comment I would make is that if they've been able to successfully navigate the development application process and get an approval, that's fantastic. We still think that our DA is worthy of support because it's achieving what council really wanted to achieve, which was a house in that location that didn't obstruct the view corridor, and we say we're doing it less than if you did something the way council has orientated it.
It was just a follow-on, because we had observed during our discussions and the briefings about that there did appear to be some scope to still have a building envelope that was above the PMF level, but I was just wondering how does the effluent irrigation area correlate? I assume it has to be above the PMF plus a distance from the banks of the Wingecarribee River.
Well, it's certainly got to be a minimum distance from the river.
Yeah.
And it should be, as far as I understand, above the 100-year level. Between the 100 and the PMF, which in that location I don't think is a huge distance, my understanding is that the council may have some discretion on that, because the PMF is generally not used in that way to prescribe outcome or restrict stuff. You can take it into account. And if you can get it outside of the PMF, all the better. But in a case like this, if there are other benefits, some of the effluent disposal area between the PMF and the 100 may be acceptable, but we haven't investigated that. We talked to council about the application and their attitude towards the envelope and the reorientation. I thank council for the opportunity to put it in front of the panel. But at that time, the council message, and that's the message that's come through in the report, is we're not interested in changing the envelope. So we didn't pursue a redesign that moved it down the hill, even though I think from memory that was something that we mentioned at the meeting. But if that is an outcome that leads to, you know, an approval, well, I'm sure on behalf of my client we can accommodate that.
Because we haven't got the full history, but it would seem that one of the underlying thinking of the orientation of the envelope is, you know, they've created a series of, you know, relatively narrow blocks, and by having the long axis running parallel with that length, you increase your spatial separation from the side. So I was, you know, wondering if you did have a building orientation that conformed with that, plus slid down the hill, perhaps there's a better outcome potential. To me, the orientation down the side, you know, getting the greatest rate, it's sort of like intuitive, you think that's better, but on analysis, I don't think that that's necessarily the case. The more important issue is the identification of those view corridors and staying out of those as much as you possibly can. But then the slight staggering of the dwellings, okay, and which will occur. So they're not all in a uniform line like that, where those issues of the side boundary would become more obvious or prominent, you know. So there is that natural staggering. The other thing about this one is that being lot 4, it's right in the middle, okay? It's right in the middle. There's 3 on one side, 3 on the other. If you've been there and you know, you had the opportunity, coming from Bowral to Moss Vale, the view of the site itself is very minimal, in fact, okay, for other reasons. You know, existing development, existing vegetation, the geometry of the road at that location is lower than the natural landform. And the view of my client's lot is non-existent, in fact, until you are right there at the subdivision driveway. 90 kilometres an hour along there, you ain't looking like that. You're not looking like that and looking down towards the river. It's just not happening. From Moss Vale back to Bowral, the view across this site is far more prominent and important. Thankfully, it's where your kangaroos are, those metal kangaroos there. That's not part of the site. When you come up past Bryce and you're looking in that northeast direction is your best view of this, the most sensitive view of this location. My client's property is nowhere near there, and you're going to have 3 houses between there and her. It's simply not, I would say it's the least sensitive of the sites for view corridors. Not the most prominent. You will not know. So I think in terms of a difference between orientation this way or that way, I really don't see that it would make any difference, okay? It makes a big difference to an applicant because it's their home and they're trying to orientate in the best way that for their needs. If the council can't tell me that there is a direct impact from what we are doing that is worse than what they have said we should do, I don't think the council can sustain their position. That's just my point of view, and that's what I'm here trying to convince you of.
Sorry, just that the whole concept of allowing development on this site, which was very controversial at any rate,
Yes.
was to minimise any visual impact, and it must be less visual impact if the house is running down the site rather than running across it. This is a very wide building that's being proposed with additional garages on the side and what have you. If it was orientated down the site and pushed out of the view corridor, it would have to have less impact than what's proposed at the moment.
Well, that may be true, okay?
It is true. Yeah.
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, you're saying that's got to be true because it's like this rather than like that. But what you're suggesting is that perhaps the best outcome possible is a change to the building envelope. Now, council was not contemplating that and would not contemplate that. And that's why we're here today with what we proposed in the first instance. Now, all I can measure our proposition against at the moment are the controls council put in place, which was the view corridor. We've demonstrated, and council hasn't said that's wrong, we demonstrated that there was a marginal reduction in the amount of building within the view corridor when you do it our way as distinct from council's way. And like I said, that's the logic that we're bringing to it. Now, if council wants to say we got it wrong, let's change the building envelope, okay? Well, my client at least has a different building envelope to think about, and it would be a slightly different development. I still stand by what I said before in terms of the orientation across the property is intuitively worse, you think. It's got to be worse. Not for Lot 4, because you just don't see it.
Well, okay, so even allowing for that, if you say that you want to orientate it across the site, it extends beyond the building envelope even in that direction. It may be 600 square metres, but it's extending beyond the lines that were drawn for the building envelope on that site.
Well, I'll correct me, no, someone might correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the council assessment report claims that there's a building footprint of 574.98 square metres, and we're dealing with a building envelope of 600, so we're within it. We can't be bigger than 600 if the council's saying it's 574.9.
Size-wise, but extending across, breaking the boundaries of the building envelope on both sides.
The way the building envelope as it's been prescribed by council. Oh yeah, that's true. I'm not arguing that. What I was arguing is that the council orientates the building envelope like this, and we want to orientate it like that. We acknowledge that. We acknowledge the size of the building envelope at 600 square metres, and like I've said before, I think that's on the small side, but the council had its reasons for doing that. We've got a building footprint that the council says in its assessment report is less than 600 square metres, so we don't think we're breaching that at all. The orientation of it across the site means that the distance between the side boundaries is less than it would be, and Mr. Barwick mentioned that. My comment was that intuitively you think that that would be a worse outcome from a visual impact point of view, but I don't think that that would be the case, particularly on this particular property where you don't see it. It's right in the middle, and by the time these other houses are there, as far as any of them will be seen, it won't be this one. It'll be Lot 7 particularly, perhaps, because it's the first one that you will see when you come from Moss Vale, where the greatest view of the properties will be from. Or it'll be dwellings 1, 2 or 3 as you come from Bowral to Moss Vale. It won't be dwelling 4 that'll be tucked away amongst all of this other stuff that's already there. I think the council's principle of view retention is sound. No one's arguing with that. I think the impact of this particular property development is overstated to the extent that council's arguments about we must retain the envelope are not reasonable. And they're not reasonable, particularly when I've shown, or we've shown, that there is a lesser impact on the view corridor, not a greater one.
Yes, I take what you're saying, Scott. Your main argument seems to be based around the idea of both options. The building would be for comparison's sake, the building would be encroaching on the view
Both.
corridor lines.
Both options.
On
This
what
way or
you
that
were
way?
saying.
Yes.
But in fact, my understanding of the restriction on the land is that there are two restrictions, is the building envelope and the view corridor. So if the view corridor is encroaching on that 600 square metre building envelope, then that is the restriction that the 88B is expecting, or the council is expecting. You said that the gross floor area of this development is, I mean, you quoted the consultant
The
planner.
building
that it was
footprint, I think it's what they call it.
The consultant planner said it was around 547 square metres or something like that.
Yeah, building footprint.
Yep. And the diagram that we've been shown, just this one here, which shows
Oh, yeah.
the build, and my rough estimation is that's probably about 50 square metres. So that is allowing a building area of 550 square metres.
Sorry, can I just point
oriented-
to that at the back? That's the equivalent, sorry, Ms. Kelly, Linda, that yellow piece there, I think that's the corresponding
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
triangle to what you've just
Yeah.
pointed out, isn't it? Yes. Oh, there it is. Yeah, that's right, is it? Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is there was an opportunity to try and design a building of a similar size within the restrictions of the property as it was purchased, rather than the solution being to switch the orientation around.
Oh, well, yes. Yes, that's a statement of fact. Yes, it was possible to do that. But, if there's a but or a maybe, but I would question why then has council placed the envelope with a knowing conflict between the aspirations and, of the property owners and council's aspiration of maintaining a view corridor, when quite simply the thing to have done was to make sure there was no conflict. I'm also not sure that, that because there is potentially a conflict between the two restrictions, that one should then immediately override the other. Okay? The view corridor is there to identify, a line of sight that the council wishes to maintain. Okay, well, if it's 50 square metres in the entirety of that view corridor, it's very marginal as well. So it's difficult. I get it, it's difficult, but I wouldn't automatically subscribe to the view that because there's a conflict, it must be the view corridor that wins, so to speak, or prevails, is a better word. It just would have been better if there wasn't a conflict. But having said all that, I still maintain that our orientation is better than the one that the council wants. And that's the basis of our application.
Okay, thank you for
No,
coming
thank
on
you very
today.
much for that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
So as previously indicated, we'll now move into closed session to deliberate and return to the public meeting to announce our decisions, and that will be live streamed. The minutes of the meeting should be placed on the council website within 2 business days. I'd like to thank my fellow panel members and the council staff for their assistance today. Thank you. The meeting is closed at 2:30 p.m.